The word dream is often misapplied when people talk about my painting. They are dreams very different from the ones we have while sleeping. On the contrary, these dreams are of a voluntary nature, and not in the least imprecise like the feelings we experience when escaping into sleep.
Why then are these images so arresting, so disconcerting? Why, more than a decade after his death, should the work of this man still make so powerful an impact upon the imagination of our time? He was a Belgian and a surrealist, René Magritte. Brussels, the residential area of Schaerbeek, Rue des Mimosas, a street much like any other. Number 97 was Magritte's house. It bears a strong family likeness to the houses in his paintings. Neat, precise, formal in appearance, like the man himself. Ever since Magritte died in August 1967, his widow Georgette has meticulously guarded all the objects and souvenirs he cherished. On the first floor, his palette, box of paints, brushes, his easel, and the painting he was working on when he died, unfinished. Downstairs, another painting amid the Louis XVI furniture and a grand piano, along with porcelain birds, gilt cherubs, family photographs, and 5 clocks which ring out the hour in a silent room. Magritte's way of working was the opposite of the bohemian artist. No flamboyance, no show. An orderly life. He detested journeys, especially flying. And cars. He only ever owned one, a red Lancia, for 5 days. Until the end of his life, he preferred to take the tram.
I detest resignation, patience, professional heroism, and all obligatory noble sentiments. I also detest the decorative arts, folklore, advertising, the voices of announcers, aerodynamics, Boy Scouts, current affairs, and drunks. What I like is subversive humour, freckles, women's knees, and their long hair, the laughter of children being themselves, a girl running in the street. I long for love that is alive, for what is impossible and ambiguous. I dread knowing precisely where my limits are.
René Magritte was born on the 21st of November 1898, the eldest of 3 sons. His hometown was Lessines, in the French-speaking part of Belgium. The house was close to the town station, as though by design, because the Magritte family was forever on the move. Magritte's father was a small-time businessman who sold foodstuffs. Nothing artistic about Magritte's background, but its very ordinariness was something he came to value and to use.
I want to breathe new life into the way we look at the ordinary things around us. But how should one look? Like a child, the first time it encounters a reality outside itself. I live in the same state of innocence as a child who believes he can reach out from his cot and grasp a bird in the sky.
La première fois que j'ai vu quelque chose du monde, et c'était une caisse.
There was a chest right by my cot, and it struck me as most mysterious. I didn't know what this object meant. Actually, I'm sure that for all children, the very first thing they see must come as a similar surprise.
La première chose qu'ils voient du monde doit leur causer une telle surprise.
Magritte's paintings are charged with images from his childhood, like the man balloon which collapsed one day onto the roof of the family home, and chessmen. These and many other images found their way into his paintings, taking on new life, always in unexpected contexts. Then there was that new world for a child's imagination, the cinema. Magritte would go along to the local picture house with his brothers, and they'd sit agog watching silent thrillers. The vogue of the day was Fantomas by Feuillade, also Feuillade's Vampires, Garnier's Mysteries of New York, and The Man with the India Rubber Head by Méliès. In 1910, when Magritte was 12, the family made its last move to a house near the river in the industrial town of Châtelet, about 50 kilometers from Brussels. Of all the childhood experiences which fed Magritte's art, what happened here was the most painful. His mother, quite unexpectedly, drowned herself in the river. A friend of Magritte has described what happened. She was sharing her room with her youngest child. Finding he was alone, in the middle of the night he woke the family. Noticing footprints on the doorstep and the pavement outside, they traced them to a bridge over the river Sambre. Magritte's mother had thrown herself into the water. When her body was retrieved, her face was enveloped in her nightdress. It was never known whether she had covered her eyes so as not to see the death she'd chosen, or if the current had covered her in this way. Another memory was of a holiday staying with relatives in the small country town of Soigny.
When I was a child, I used to play with a little girl in the old disused cemetery of a country town. We'd explore the vaults by working open the heavy iron doors. Once, when we climbed back up into the daylight, there was an artist who'd come here from the city. He was painting a picturesque avenue of trees and crumbling stone columns. At that time, the art of painting struck me as vaguely magical, and a painter was someone endowed with lofty powers. A long time afterwards, when I was an adult, that little girl I'd known in the cemetery returned to haunt my daydreams.
When Magritte was 14, an even more important encounter took place.
À ce moment-là, dans les fêtes foraines, il y avait des carrousels salons, c'est-à-dire...
In the street fairs, they used to have merry-go-rounds with wooden horses and a kind of decorated tent, looking rather like a drawing room. It was here I met a young girl who eventually became my wife.
Georgette, qui est devenue par la suite ma femme.
All the images of women I have painted since are likenesses of Georgette.
Georgette.
At the age of 18, like all budding painters, Magritte moved to the capital to go to art school. This was the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, the year 1916. The teaching here, true to the name of the place, was academic. Conventional studies from nature, drawings of classical sculpture, and of course, the life class.
If in my childhood the art of painting had seemed to me vaguely magical, I soon learned, unfortunately, that painting had very little indeed to do with everyday life, and that every bid for freedom had always been scoffed at by the general public. As for artists themselves, the majority of them gave up their independence without a fight, and placed their art at the service of no matter whom or no matter what. Their personal concerns and aspirations were no different from those of anyone else with a career in mind. This was how I came to acquire a total mistrust of all art and artists once they'd received official recognition, or seemed to be aiming to get it. I felt I had nothing in common with such a group of people.
Then there was military service. A fellow conscript was Pierre Bourgeois, who edited avant-garde magazines. He showed Magritte reproductions of a number of recent paintings by the Italian futurists. The scales fell from Magritte's eyes.
I was intoxicated. I painted a whole series of futurist pictures. All the same, I don't consider myself to have been exactly an orthodox futurist, because the lyrical freedom I wanted had, at heart, a constant preoccupation quite alien to the futurist movement. This was a pure and powerful emotion. Eroticism.
Magritte was now 24. He was still borrowing his ideas. What's more, his futurist paintings weren't selling, and he began to have serious financial problems. To earn a living, he took a job in a wallpaper factory. It was dreary work, painting flowers on gigantic rolls of paper. An uninspiring task, but once again the images were later to find their way into his paintings. Still at the wallpaper factory, Magritte came across the work of an artist who was to change his life. He saw a reproduction of The Song of Love. The man who painted it was Giorgio de Chirico. Chirico was Italian, 10 years older than Magritte, and the founder of what was called metaphysical painting. In other words, painting in which reality and meaning were visionary rather than literal. It was as if Chirico had shown Magritte a mirror of his own mind. Magritte was inspired.
It's a new vision of things, in which the spectator recognizes his isolation and listens to the silence of the world.
From now on, in the mid-1920s, everything Magritte experienced seemed to undergo a visionary metamorphosis. In 1926, he painted a picture which owed nothing to his art school training, even less to futurism, and in no way echoed Chirico. This was The Lost Jockey. It was Magritte's first utterly personal statement. Here was that disconcerting association of images which was to characterize his art for the remaining 40 years of his life. Images which, because they're grouped in apparent incongruity, demand of the spectator that he redefine what is real and experience it afresh. We should re-experience our perception of the world with the freshness of a child. From 1926 onwards, a group of friends, mostly writers or musicians, met regularly in Magritte's house or in Brussels cafes. Right up to the Second World War, this group was in close contact with the Surrealist painters and poets in Paris, and they became known as the Belgian Surrealists. Magritte was the leading figure. From 1927 to 1930, Magritte himself went to live in France, outside Paris. He took part in meetings at the house of the spokesman for the French Surrealists, André Breton. He contributed to Surrealist publications. Magritte and his wife Georgette spent holidays at Cadaqués on the Spanish coast with the Surrealist painter Salvador Dali and the poet Paul Éluard. When Breton asked himself rhetorically, "What is Surrealism?" he answered, "It's the cuckoo's egg placed in the nest with the complicity of René Magritte." Among all the Surrealists, the work of Magritte is the most disarmingly simple, and maybe this is why it retains its power to disturb and excite us. "This is not a pipe," Magritte wrote under a picture of a pipe. Apparently a perverse statement, in fact correct.
A picture is not to be confused with something tangible. Could you fill this pipe of mine? No, you couldn't, could you? It's only an image. If I'd written beneath my painting, "This is a pipe," I should have been lying. A picture of a slice of bread and jam is assuredly not something you can eat. There's also no logical connection between an object and the name we give to it, which does not represent what that object really is.
Magritte preferred not to work in a studio as such, just as he avoided looking like an artist or leading the life artists were expected to lead. He would work in the dining room, putting away his brushes when meals were served. Was it affectation? No, rather he felt getting away from affectation. In the same way, he insisted on a deadpan, non-painterly style.
What one should paint is a picture which looks most like the real thing. In my pictures, I have placed objects in situations where we never encounter them. Because I wanted the most familiar objects to utter a kind of scream, these had to be arranged in a fresh order and acquire a meaning that was deeply upsetting. Wooden table legs turned on a lathe lost their ordinariness if all of a sudden they rose high above a forest. Those small iron bells slung round the necks of our fine horses, I envisaged them popping up like dangerous plants at the edge of an abyss. A woman's body floating above a town was an admirable substitute for the angels, which never appeared before my eyes.
Il y a un sentiment familier de la poésie.
Some poetic experiences are commonly felt. To give a simple example, tourists travel enormous distances, and yet the poetic experience they seek is something they bring with them. It's been in their heads all the time. Whereas quite ordinary, everyday things can enable one to discover a kind of poetry, which is totally unfamiliar.
Alors que le familier, lui, peut être l'occasion de découvrir la poésie qui n'est pas familière, la poésie inconnue.
Magritte often said that it wasn't the painting itself that mattered, but the effect it made on your mind. In a painting called Perpetual Movement, a man lifts a dumbbell, one of whose weights is his own head. It's a shocking thought, rather horrible, but how intriguing. Magritte's paintings detonate in the mind, a little late, like a time bomb. A mermaid reversed, an image reversed.
Vous éprouvez ce sentiment d'angoisse parce que vous êtes sensible.
You experience a feeling of unease. If you are affected by a picture, you experience vertigo or anxiety. I don't believe that what is mysterious can be predetermined.
Quelque chose de connaissable, c'est l'inconnaissable.
It's quite possible that being unforeseeable, it may make us feel joy just as easily. When we encounter what we don't expect, we may find ourselves thrown by it. Whereas, in fact, I believe we are where we should like to be.
Nous sommes repaysés. Nous sommes là où nous désirons nous trouver.
There's something particularly intriguing about seeing a rock floating in the sky. It compels you to ask the question, why doesn't it fall? But have you ever asked yourself the more obvious question? Why does a rock fall? Great physicists, from Newton to Einstein, have been curious to know the cause of such daily events. Why does an apple fall? Why does a magnet attract? What makes a wave go forwards and backwards? A sense of wonder is a characteristic of both artists and men of science.
Objects are not only in unfamiliar conjunctions, they are also of unfamiliar materials. What should be soft is hard, warm becomes cold. What is impermanent is fossilized for all time.
En ce qui me concerne, j'ai peint des images où...
My pictures illustrate the opposite of the popular notion that if you have two incongruous images, you must somehow find a way of reconciling them. Everything that's visible hides something else that's visible.
Chose visible cache autre chose de visible.
A splendid green apple conceals the face of a man in a bowler hat. And this picture is called The Great War.
The title is a puzzle, and so is the painting. What lies behind the apple? Or the violets? Do they grow out of the face? Is there a face there at all? Disturbing again.
In the Walks of Euclid, I set in front of a window, seen from the inside of a room, a picture, on which was painted exactly that part of the view which the canvas concealed. In the picture called The Human Condition, the tree hid the real tree behind it, outside the room. This is the way we see the world. We see it as something outside ourselves, and yet actually we have only the imprint of it in our heads.
Magritte was an addict of silent films, and he had a go at making his own. Screen comics delighted him, particularly Laurel and Hardy. His own 8mm home movies were strictly amateur, made for the fun of it with his friends and with Georgette. Sometimes there would be private film shows of their efforts. Magritte didn't consider that he was making films, he was playing around with camera effects. The strangeness of his pictures continued through the 30s, and the strangeness of their titles. This is The Black Flag. Then came the war, and two things happened to Magritte. He became briefly a communist, and his pictures suddenly became sweet and full of sunshine.
I set against the general pessimism the search for joy, for pleasure. The colors of my paintings will be the most exuberant it's possible for me to obtain. To the best of my ability, I shall employ the technique which the worthy Impressionists brought to perfection, and which is ideally suited to this end.
Friends referred to this as Magritte's nasty period, and he soon abandoned it.
Rien ne va plus. 16 rouge père immense.
Calice évidemment.
Then, in the early 50s, Gustav Nelletz, director of the casino at Knokke-le-Zout on the Belgian coast, commissioned for Magritte 8 large murals. Magritte did the originals on a small scale, and these were enlarged and painted onto the walls of the casino by students under his supervision. The 8 panels embraced many of Magritte's recurring themes. Together, they were called the Enchanted Realm.
Rien ne va plus. 32 rouge père passe. Rien ne va plus. $500 le douzaine, 1000 francs. S'il vous plaît. 500 paires, 200 passes et 500 à passe. Rien ne va plus.
Was ever gambling conducted under such a curious gaze? Fame worldwide only came to Magritte during the last 10 years of his life, and he was able to enjoy something of the art boom of the 50s and 60s. Awards and prizes came his way. There was a queue of commissions he was unable to satisfy. Retrospective exhibitions were held of his work. He even put his dislike of travel behind him and set off for the United States and for Israel. But it was his own private, almost anonymous world which remained most dear to Magritte. To the end of his life, the journey most to his taste, he said, was a journey round his room. In July 1967, Magritte made drawings in his last sketchbook, variations on the same familiar images. Then in August, he drew on a large sheet of paper the outline of an inert hand. It was a kind of premonition. Magritte died at his home on the 15th of August, 1967. He was 68, and he was buried in the local cemetery at Schaerbeek, the Brussels suburb where he had lived.
I do not know the true reason for painting, any more than I know the reason why we live and die. Thrust from the earth towards the sun, a tree is an image, standing for a kind of joy. To comprehend that image, we must be quite still, like the tree. The moment we move, it is the tree which becomes the spectator. In the forms of chairs, a table, or a door, the tree continues to keep watch over the agitated spectacle which is our life. Later, when the tree has become a coffin, it disappears into the ground again. And when it is consumed by flames, it vanishes into the air.